Senator Cramer, welcome back to Point of View. Always great to have you. I know we've got you for a limited time, so I want to jump right in here. And I want to start with something that is shocking: cancel culture. We're doing a town hall here today. One of the first questions that came in for you was, hey, what's Senator Cramer going to do to help protect my First and Second Amendment rights? So if you don't mind, sir, I'm going to take a little bit of time to set this up, and then I want to get your reaction and ask you about it, okay? So last night, it was actually 1 year ago yesterday, where President Trump stood up and talked about, hey, just 15 days to stop the spread. He did a press conference. It was him, Dr. Fauci, Vice President Pence, Deborah Berg, a bunch of people. What happened, sir, was we did a mashup last night. We played a little bit of President Trump, a little bit of Dr. Fauci, a little bit of Vice President Pence, a little bit of Dr. Berg's. And then I posted on Facebook, and here's what it says. Your video is partially muted because it may contain music that belongs to someone else. They said Morning Joe. I personally have no idea what they're talking about. But what I want you to see here, Senator, is watch what happens when I press play here on President Trump. And I'm going to fast forward a little bit to the exact same clip and go to Dr. Fauci and just notice something. Can you hear him, Senator?
I cannot.
Exactly. Now watch this.
July, the guidelines are a 15-day trial guideline to be reconsidering.
You're Dr. Fauci, Senator?
Guidelines are now going to be in effect until July. But the president was saying that.
So Facebook, and I'm going to bring this up here, Facebook muted, Senator, the only part of that video of President Trump. And I want to share with you a little bit about what he said.
Anthony,
and
I think I ask him that question every day. And I speak to Deborah, I speak to a lot of them. I get the opinion. So it seems to me that if we do a really good job, we'll not only hold the death down to a level.
So for time's sake, but we played about a minute of that, sir. And the only part of the video that was muted was President of the United States in a COVID presser. Please tell me what you were doing to Facebook, Twitter, these companies to stop this cancel culture.
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, with regard to Facebook and all of the other tech giants, and I'd be very interested, frankly, in thoughts that your viewers might have about this. Remembering that they are private companies, that they have investors, that they are not broadcasters, unlike, say, somebody that's broadcasting over the airwaves, like TV stations and radio stations do, which is, of course, public spectrum, and you know about all of that. But they are nonetheless, in my view, they should be subject to some form of regulation, including the standards of decency. That's where the 230 protections get in. The problem is this, though, in terms of what am I, quote, doing about it. We can do things like we're doing right now, keep highlighting it. We can keep the pressure on. We can ask these CEOs and whatnot questions in various hearings. My fear, though, is that the only way to really get them to change their behavior is to litigate it. I do think there's some bipartisan support for going after some of the tech giants for different reasons. And for Democrats, one of the biggest reasons is they just make too much money, or they don't share their revenue, their ad revenue, with others that ride on their platforms. For Republicans or for conservatives, it's the First Amendment issues. It's the violation of people's First Amendment rights. In the fact that they're monopolies or near monopolies, I think does provide some opportunity for other types of litigation. And this is where the states are getting involved. And that has to do with antitrust. But remembering that not all tech companies are the same. Facebook's not the same as Twitter. Twitter's not the same as, say, Amazon with its servers. None of them are the same as an internet service provider, which is more sort of a common carrier. So it's complex, Chris. The answer I'd love to give you is what we ought to do is we need to find a way to incentivize or inspire competition. And that's going to be really, really hard to do when a company has the kind of lock on the marketplace like a Facebook has. So, but I think we just have to keep dragging them in front of committees. We have to keep threatening them with legislation as well as litigation.
And I hear everything you're saying, sir. I think where I'm struggling, our audience is struggling, is the fact that we are under this idea we live in the freest country in the world. And that's probably true. But my point is that this wasn't some random video. This was actually video taken from from the White House YouTube channel a year and a day ago. There was nothing nefarious said there. And the fact that a company can silence the president of the United States, I guess, bigger picture, that could happen to you.
Yeah, so yes, it can. I would expect it might someday. I pushed the boundaries a little bit.
Can I just pause for 1 second? Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, because I guess the other piece that I wanted to add there is that the most disheartening piece to me here that Facebook did, because honestly, if I wouldn't have done the homework, I would have just looked at this and thought, oh, apparently there was music in my video that I didn't. There is no music in this video. There's no Morning Joe, so they're lying about it.
Yeah, so they're lying. Their excuse is made up. So again, unless there's a law violated, and we could argue that there's a constitutional right that has been violated in the president of the United States. But here's what I don't understand, Chris. Unless there's a law violated, it's hard to go after them with some sort of enforcement mechanism until such time there'd be a regulation or a new law created. And we'll continue to work on those. I think the 230 protections, that is the as you know, that's the Decency Act protections of liability protections that they enjoy, that a newspaper doesn't enjoy, by the way, that a new television station, news department doesn't enjoy, but these guys do. And that's one area where we have gone after them. I've joined in letters, I've joined in legislation, but until such time as there's enough of a will politically to get something like that passed, I think what we do is keep highlighting it. But here's what escapes me. Here's probably what concerns me, Chris, more than anything. It's not that even just that Facebook does it. It's that there are such barriers to competition. Take, for example, Parler, which was and is a competing, more conservative, or shall we say mainstream platform for people to socialize on. Parler was shut down not by the government, not by Facebook or their competitors, more direct competitors, Twitter. They were shut down by Amazon. Why? Because Amazon owns many of the servers that they ride on. So Amazon's using their utility power to shut down a competitor. That is the essence of antitrust. That's the essence of antitrust. So I do think some of these states are on the right path. But here's the other thing, the bigger, high level concern I have. These are communications companies. These are platforms designed to share information. What bothers me is their CEOs, their owners, their founders seem to not even have a fundamental understanding of how special the United States of America is. They don't have any concept of how fantastic their freedom is. They have no appreciation for the fact that in no other country in the world could they do what they do here.
Sir,
they're American-based on purpose.
You are reading my mind. We're going to get to the China thing in a moment, where I think there's some pretty shocking news there. So let's talk about this for a moment. You had tweeted out on March 14th, because Dr. Fauci was suggesting, hey, President Trump should push his reporters to get the COVID vaccine. You said Fauci can't be this ignorant. Freedom lovers don't just follow Trump on command. Their views on personal privacy and skepticism. Last night, President Trump did an interview with Maria Bartiromo on Fox News and says, hey, I'm quoting here, I would recommend it. I would recommend it to a lot of people that don't want to get it. And a lot of those people voted for me. We have our freedoms. We have to live by that. And I agree with that also. I was pretty stunned by that. I want to get your reaction to President Trump recommending the COVID-19 vaccine.
Well, first of all, Chris, I wasn't surprised he did that, because as you know, he was quite bullish on the vaccine. And by the way, could we take this moment just to say thank you very much, President Trump, for Operation Warp Speed, for getting us 3 vaccines in super duper record time, something that no other president in yours and my lifetime would have or could have done. They wouldn't have done it because they wouldn't have worked that hard. They wouldn't have worked that hard on it. Nobody would have pushed the FDA and the bureaucracy the way Donald Trump did. That's why he became president. That's why we have 3 vaccines today. He also took the vaccine, as you know, he and the First Lady did very quietly in January. So I was surprised that he advocates for it and that he suggested that people do it. But the bottom line is this, that he also recognized my point. People are free to do what they want. And the reason free people follow Donald Trump and support Donald Trump is because he respects that freedom. Anthony Fauci, on the other hand, seems to have no respect for that liberty. And that's what makes us conservatives. That's what makes us Republicans. It's what makes us want to support Donald Trump as opposed to the other way around. And I think Anthony Fauci illustrated in those statements to the Sunday TV shows that he doesn't understand that he doesn't understand that the heart of a conservative is somebody who takes personal responsibility, appreciates personal liberty, and at the same time appreciates personal privacy. And so anyway, that's what I was tweeting about.
I hear the governors talk about their vaccination rates, and you are able to dive into this a heck of a lot better than I am. Is there, and I'm only saying this because even when President Biden got up to speak and he did his address, fairly recently, there's just such a conversation about take the vaccine, take the vaccine. Is there some kind of financial incentive for states to have high vaccination rates, or am I missing something? Are they just pushing it because they want to push it, or what?
Yeah, so good point. I don't know what's in the heart of every state or every governor or whatnot. But Chris, what I think is, I do think there is a natural, appropriate incentive, and that is they want to get things back to normal as quickly as they can. They know that the vaccine is the fastest vehicle to getting to herd immunity. Although I have a sense that if they tested everybody in America for antibodies, they'd find out there's a lot more immunity out there than they even know about. But I think that's what the vaccine does. It represents the best opportunity for these mayors and these states to reopen for business and to generate the type of economic activity that results in a booming economy and revenue for their priorities, things like that.
Have you taken the shot? And if not, will you take it as soon as you have the opportunity?
So as you know, I've had the opportunity quite early on because they made members of Congress a high priority for the continuation of government argument. I did not. I think you probably know, I did test positive for the antibodies. I never had a positive test for the pandemic or for the virus. Although I did test multiple times, but I did have a very positive test, strong test for antibodies, which means I obviously had the virus at some point and just have no idea when because I've never had a symptom. That said, because of that, and because frankly, as a pretty healthy 60-year-old man, I didn't really feel all that comfortable getting ahead of the line, even though I'm a United States Senator. I'm pretty sure there are other people that can handle it. But I will, in fact, take it. I will, in fact, get the vaccine. In fact, I might even be scheduled to do it. I'm just not sure right now, but I've been waiting to let the antibodies wear off a little bit. In fact, I've been advised by a few doctors that there's no reason for somebody that has antibodies to get the vaccine. In fact, there could be a detriment to that with your system. So they advise waiting.
Thank you for that, sir. So I want to share some with you, and again, kind of big picture, your reaction to this. What I'm going to share with you are a couple of comments from March 8th of 2020, one from Dr. Fauci, one from the former U.S. Surgeon General about masks. And I think what has people so up in arms, sir, is how much of this has seemed fairly arbitrary. I'm sure you've seen the recent study now at schools where they're saying whether you're 6 feet or 3 feet social distancing doesn't really matter when it comes to the transmission. And you think about the impact we've had on our kids and our society based on this 6 foot rule that now seems to be completely arbitrary and not even accurate. It's just stunning. And so I want to play this for you, and then we will talk about it on the other side.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
You're sure of it? Because people are listening really closely to this.
Right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask. When you're in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and it might even block a droplet, but it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is. And often, there are unintended consequences. People keep fiddling with the mask, and they keep touching their face.
Thank you, and stay safe by washing your hands, by covering your cough, by staying home if you're sick. Masks do not work for the general public in preventing them from getting coronavirus.
Right, and elbow bump.
What? I'm just going to let that sit there and let you react, sir.
So, Chris, we know that this has been a moving target. We know that a lot of good, smart people like the Surgeon General, like Dr. Fauci, have changed their opinions through this. I think one of the challenges that this pandemic has presented is actions required like every day. And we don't oftentimes have the advantage of history or even having the type of science available to us, but we do have previous experiences, and I think that's what they were talking about early on. I am of the personal belief, having watched that, having listened to others, that masks, in fact, I would back up. I've read a number of studies, including, and I forget which one it was now, but one of the medical journals did a study on masks. They actually used the terminology talisman, that it serves as a talisman. Oh, what a talisman is this, that's sort of the group think, it makes everybody feel better, the way Dr. Fauci put it. That's not completely unimportant, for sure, but wearing masks makes a lot of people feel a lot worse. Both the mask wearer and the people around them, and particularly in schools where relationships between the students and the teacher are such a critical part of learning. So I don't know what to believe. I do know this. I think a lot of honest mistakes were made in the name of CYA. I think a lot of honest mistakes were in advising were made in the name of the least risk, the most risk averse. But it's really time to move on. And frankly, especially now with so many people having the antibodies and so many people having the vaccines, and there's a mixed message now that really is confusing.
So yeah, I agree with you. It's time to move on. I just want to play it for you because there were people that were assaulted in different stores across the country if they didn't have a mask on and whatnot. I guess what I'm trying to get at is I just don't want to see Americans be sheeple, right? And I hear that, and like all these people, they got different conversations around masks, and then you have two people there saying, don't do it. And that's where I have concern. Like, let's just all take a deep breath. Let's think for ourselves. Let's do the right thing for our community and our families, and we'll go from there. So I want to ask you this, sir. It has been now over a year since we've had this virus in our country. Tomorrow, the U.S. and China meet in Alaska. Can you now tell us where this virus came from? Did it come from a lab? Did it come from an animal? What's going on? And if not, how do we not know that by now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know how we do not know that by now. And if we do, I don't. If there's somebody that does, certainly investigations are ongoing. But the World Health Organization is such an apologist for China that we certainly can't rely on them to get us the information. You can't rely, for good reason, for understandable reasons, on the state-owned media in China to get to the bottom of it and reveal it. They don't let a lot of our people in to do the type of investigation that would be necessary. So whether we'll ever know it, I'm not completely certain. But we ought to keep insisting on answers, and we ought to condition our relationship with China on getting answers to that, Chris. But we also have to remember and understand, and I think we've come to a realization. In fact, I would submit to you that one of the more bipartisan issues growing in this country and around the world is that China's a bad actor. Thank you, Donald Trump, for bringing that to our attention as well, because there were a lot of China apologists. I don't want to say Chinese, but China apologists, including the current president, as recently as last summer and fall when he was running for the job, who weren't where a lot of people are today. So we just have to come to realize that China is a bad actor. And by the way, someday we could do a whole one of these just on China and our relationship and the things that I see in Armed Services Committee hearings and other places.
I want to jump in this a little bit, sir, because there is a story coming out of Fox News. Former top State Department investigator says COVID resulted from a bioweapons research accident. I'm going to quote from the article, sir. This came out on March 12th. The State Department's former lead investigator who oversaw task force into COVID-19 virus origin tells Fox he not only believes the virus escaped from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, but that it may have been the result of research that the Chinese military, and I'm going to make a point here because I want to talk about this, or People's Liberation Army was doing as a bioweapon. And then today, Chinese state media comes out with this lead scientist of the WHO talking about the release of the WHO thing that came out on February 9th, suggesting it didn't come from a lab, which, like, we're supposed to believe that.
Right.
I guess what I want to get at is do you, based on what you see here from a top state investigator, do you have more of an inkling that it came from a lab, or do you have no idea? And the China's Liberation Party recently did a cyber attack against North Dakota. So just your comments out in general, sir.
So a few things. First of all, with regard to the lab question, where it came from, I don't know that and I'm certainly far from an expert, Chris, and short of getting a classified briefing from people who are experts that I would trust, I wouldn't want to make that claim. Obviously, my words matter. So I'd want to be careful about that. But there's every reason in the world to not trust what's coming out of China. And if in fact it was a weapon experiment gone bad or weapons development gone bad, I would tell you this: it could be a pretty effective weapon. The problem I would see with it, the way the virus has behaved, is of course it doesn't exempt anybody, including people in China. So on the other hand, remembering who China, who runs China and the Communist Party of China, it's not beyond them to just simply use people. As we know, a lot of Chinese people just disappear, and a lot of their problems just disappear. So I don't want to necessarily predict what was the motive of it, but we do know that it started in China, and any claims to the contrary are ridiculous.
So let me just put a button on this, and then we'll get into tomorrow's meeting. This gentleman, also top State Department investigator, says, hey, you've taken out 15 to 20% of the global GDP. You've killed millions of people. The Chinese population's barely been affected, and their economy's roared back to being #1 in the entire G20. That's what he's suggesting this was used as a bioweapon. So having all that in the context, what do you want to see come out of these meetings between the U.S. and China and Alaska tomorrow?
Well, this is a tough one, Chris, because what's interesting. I think it's worth North Dakotans remembering this. A year ago, when we were starting this whole thing out, remember the president. In fact, I sat in the front row at the White House when the Chinese officials and President Trump signed the China trade deal, and all the while, being very suspicious of their willingness to actually carry all of this out. So you fast forward that several weeks and some months, and here we are with this virus that originated in China, and the challenge is, remember that I was ridiculed by the current president, then helping the person that was running against that I was running against a couple of years prior, ridiculing me about my statement that our farmers are patriotic and we're willing to stand with our president during this difficult trade negotiations. Well, the fact of the matter is, we're way back up again in sales to China. We like sales to China. China's nearly 1.5 billion hungry people that eat products that we provide them. So how do you get into a negotiation with a country like that, realizing that we have something they want and they're willing to pay for it, while at the same time we can't pretend that there's something that they're not. This is a state-run economy. These are communists. These are thuggish, communists. Frankly, what I hope happens tomorrow is a clear-eyed understanding of who they are, and they need to have a clear understanding of what we won't tolerate. And I think we have to be prepared, which is why we need to continue to negotiate with our neighbors, with our allies in their neighborhood.
So let me ask you this, sir, because I know that you just mentioned you took a lot of heat from your former opponent and now current president about this. I'm curious, has the Biden administration taken the tariffs away and off of China?
No, in fact,
no, they haven't.
So the China issue, remember what I said a little bit ago, China is starting to become a unifying issue in Washington, to the point where it may very well be that yet this spring, the first real big bipartisan piece of legislation that comes to the Senate floor by Chuck Schumer will be a China piece of legislation. So it's, we haven't even begun to talk about their human rights abuses.
Well, and sir, I just think you're being humble. My point is, how often did we hear about, these tariffs are terrible, it's gonna, and now Biden hasn't been able to take them off. So it's like, okay, they can't be that bad. Let's talk about the other big issue that's happened. Unless we'll do the human rights thing at another time, just because of time's sake, sir. This one's hard for me. The southern border. There's now been reports of 4 people matching the terror watch list.
Right.
Got all these unaccompanied minors coming in. And I want to ask you in this context, sir, you've got thousands and thousands of unaccompanied minors coming in. I'm presuming some of them may speak a little bit English, but they're maybe not fluent. How is that going to impact our education system as these people begin to spread across the country? And how are we going to fund? And they've got to know how to read and write and know our language. How are we going to fund English as a second language for a lot of these people?
Well, Chris, before we even get to that, here we are on the healing side of this pandemic. Hospitals finally getting a lot of their capacity back that they reserved before for COVID. And when I say hospital, I'm talking about medical facilities along the border, cities and states along the southern border. And now we're being inundated with thousands and thousands of people, 100,000 apprehensions in the month of February alone. That's the largest February apprehension rate in 15 years. A lot of these people require medical attention immediately. None of this is something they're going to pay for. All of this is taking, again, our medical capacity away from American citizens and costing a great deal of money. And then you throw on top of that the education system and everything else. Remember that they're afforded legal protections. They get lawyers that we pay for. They get beds that we pay for. And of course, President Biden, speaking of things that he's undone, that his predecessor, President Trump, did that were good ideas, he threw them out just because they were Trump's ideas. How about the fact that he eliminated the catch and release, or he reinstated the catch and release policy of the Obama administration? And on top of that, he eliminated the Remain in Mexico policy, which prevented 80% of the illegal immigration coming across our border. 80%. And then he eliminated the deal we made with the 3 Central American countries, the Central American Triangle countries, including Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala, and created the incentive for them to come to the United States. Anyway, I know you know all of this. It's going to cost us tons.
So what's interesting, sir, is I remember how the liberal media was up in arms, suggesting that President Trump was separating young people from their families. There are reports now that President Joe Biden's created this magnet saying, hey, if you're an unaccompanied minor, we're going to keep you here. Parents are pushing their kids out of their homes in Central America and Mexico to come here. I mean, but no one's talking about the separation of kids and families. Quick question. I want to back.
Can I just correct one thing? People are talking about it. It's just that your colleagues in the national media aren't presenting those talking people, because 99% of what the media in this country wants is Joe Biden to look smarter than he is and Donald Trump to look like the perpetrator. And the reality is it's exactly the other way around.
Sir, I watch the Sunday shows. I don't know how you deal with some of your colleagues. They just flat out lie and don't even blink. It's like so I want to ask you this, because Catherine brings up a great point, just to back up for a moment. I have heard this story, don't know a lot about it, maybe you do, but the war games done by China and Canada, where Canada and Trudeau is literally bringing in some people from the Chinese military. Do you know anything about that, or what can you tell us?
Well, I don't, and I can't really tell you anything about it. But here's another area where we have some grand opportunities. Just the other day, first I had a private meeting with the combatant commander, General Van Herk of NORTHCOM and NORAD. So NORTHCOM being the Northern Command, NORAD being the Northern Aerospace. It's a relationship command with Canada. Largely looks out for the Arctic region. Very, very important relationship. The General Van Herk is he's the general for both of those. And then we had him at a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing a couple of days after that. We have a lot of relationship, obviously very important relationship with our Canadian partners. The Arctic is a very important domain that requires protection and it requires awareness. If anybody wants to go back and watch my cross-examination, you'll see some of that on there. North Dakota has an important role, and I think an increasingly important role in observing that domain. And if Canada should not be playing with China. And Chris, and you can be very helpful to me on this. In fact, I'll just announce it to you right now and to all your viewers. Just yesterday, we were talking about that in the shop here. When I called my office the shop, in the shop here, and we're going to put together a few little PSA type of deals that show some charts and graphs with regard to China's ambitions and its military growth. We talk a lot about its economic growth. We talk a lot about its economic warfare that it plays. A lot about how they use soft power in South America. I can't go into a lot of that. There's a lot of new stuff going on. Certainly Africa, we're very familiar with that. They're whipping us in lots of ways, Chris, where we're retreating and they're very aggressive, but it includes in the military realm. So one thing I would say, and I want to get back to this because you brought it up. This is a growing unifying theme that China is bad. And that includes a lot of our allies that previously were not as anti-China as they are today. The United States needs to be the lead voice in that, just like they are at NATO with regard to Russia. We need to demonstrate our leadership, and it's going to cost us a lot, but we have got to insist that our allies are in sync with us.
So, sir, I want to follow up on this. You mentioned some soft power moves in South America. Are you referring to Venezuela specifically?
Well, I'm going to leave it at that for now, Chris, because there's just, when I start talking about these things, I don't want to wade into areas that might be classified, but just know, and we know that they've done a lot of this with their Belt and Road Initiative. What they use is they use generosity, with infrastructure. They use predatory financing. They're financial traps. So they'll trap people in debt, developing countries. And what that does is that gives them access to their people, it gives them access to their territories. Mm-hmm. We sort of retreat because we're sort of in an America first mode, but we can't become America only mode. We have to be able to use all of our tools, including diplomacy, soft power, as well as the awesome deterrence of military might. So,
let me throw at something theoretical, and just for our audience, for people that don't follow this very closely, and I'm not going to put words in Senator Cramer's mouth, but if it is happening in Venezuela, folks, put your eyes on it. Venezuela is one of the most mineral-rich nations on the planet. We all know that their government's a debacle, and they can start feeding those people in Venezuela and doing some things to ingratiate them to China. That is not a good sign for the United States of America. Now, what I want to share with you there, sir, is there any possibility that China is somehow behind this move of caravans and migration up to the southern border? Because let's be honest, we all know if you flood the market with cheap labor and then all of our jobs are going over to China via Wall Street, who's going to work? I mean, what are people going to do? And no one's going to work for pennies.
Well, Chris, and therein lies the other major problem. Earlier we were talking about the cost of educating, the cost of healthcare to a flood of migrants coming across the border. But there is that economic cost to the economy itself with a cheap labor force in many cases that works under the table, and all of those things that of course makes our labor less competitive. And what we ought to be doing is exactly the opposite, not letting that happen, but bringing more of our supply chains that have been going to China. And that includes everything from pharmaceuticals, food, manufacturing, certainly rare earth minerals. Chris, when you start talking about things like computer chips and even clean energy, instead of pushing fossil fuel energy, for example, and dependence to the Middle East, which is what the Biden administration is doing, we ought to be investing more in it in our country, keeping the high-paying jobs here, putting more of the supply chain here. So anyway, I'm getting a word.
All right, sir. We'll let you go, but I think if you want to touch on this, Senator, some really good news. In fact, we're going to have a conversation with them tomorrow, but the EERC is suggesting that they are beginning to find rare earth minerals in North Dakota coal. So, I mean, if we could help, when that
and we've known that for some time, Chris, and it's actually, we're learning more and more, obviously, all the time. You're right. And there are some pretty non-intrusive ways to get some of those minerals out as well. Our innovators will always solve the problem if we don't kill them. And that's what I worry about with some of these sort of knee-jerk clean power, clean energy sort of initiatives. They're killing the innovators. They're going to solve the problems that the world needs.
Sir, do you have time for one last question?
Somebody keeps calling me on Skype.
All right, we'll be very brief. But again, I don't want to put words in your mouth. We've kind of alluded to this question in the past, and I just want to get your take. So what I find fascinating from the media perspective right now at our southern border is that, Arizona's having some challenges, but the spotlight's really on Texas.
It is.
And I'm wondering, your take is, is there again, some sort of idea that, hey, let's flood Texas and we can turn Texas blue?
So it's an interesting question, Chris, because one of the interesting things about Texas is because of their influx of legal immigrants in recent years, there's a fair chance that Texas could get a couple, maybe 3 more congressional seats. They, in all likelihood, with the lines being drawn by the Republican legislature in Texas, would very likely be Republican congressional seats. Isn't that interesting? Which is part of the reason why H.R. 1, the god-awful election reform bill that came out of the House of Representatives, wants to take, and by the way, the Constitution gives state legislatures the line-drawing responsibility, but they want to take that responsibility away from them and give it to the D.C. court system, if you can imagine, to draw the lines for congressional districts. But that's a plausible case, Chris. But remember, when you have a porous border like that, and you talked about it up front, there are people coming across, including, I think 4 recently, they're on the terror watch list, that aren't coming from Central America, and they're not coming from Mexico. They're not even coming from Latin America. They're coming from Haiti. They're coming from every place around the country, or around the world. So whatever the motive is to get into the United States, whether it's to do harm, whether it's to improve your life, whether it's to escape, some sort of, rogue country, whatever it might be, legitimate or not, the southern border of the United States is a place to flood. Whether they would try to flood Texas specifically with that kind of a political move in mind, I don't know. But I do know that it's an issue that doesn't poll well for Democrats. And I don't think Joe Biden right now is thinking this was the smartest idea he's had in the last couple of months.
But we'll see. Senator, last question for you. What about the cyber attack by China on North Dakota? It happened a couple of weeks ago. Governor Berg alluded to it as sort of an act of war, is the way he framed it in his meeting. Just want to see if you've got any information on that for us.
Well, I know probably as much as you do and as much as the governor, maybe a little more. But China's very good at this. They've done it for a long time. We don't know exactly what information they have, or if whatever they've gotten, what they've done with it, whether it's even useful to them. The problem is they've proven capable of doing it. We're pretty good at defense against it as well, Chris. We're really quite good at offense as well. And maybe what the governor's talking about is that an offensive attack like this on us demands a similar attack back. We'll see what happens. We don't always know what's going on in cyber warfare. We're quite good at it, but we need to probably get better at defending against it as well.
Yeah. Senator, you're always so gracious with your time. So I really, really appreciate it. It's great to have you, and keep up the great work, sir.
Well, keep your eyes on Iran, because Iran is another one of those issues that's percolating to the top. Maybe next time we can talk more about that.
Can you give us some idea of what you're suggesting here, sir? I mean, are they going to come to the table, or?
Well, so it's interesting. One of the things I've been a little bit encouraged by, frankly, is that the Biden administration, for all their talk of wanting to get us back into the Iran nuclear deal, speaking of sanctions and stuff, have been pretty slow to do it. I've been able to cross-examine now 3 different Biden nominees, one being the Secretary now of Defense, General Austin, and then we've got the Deputy Secretary, Secretary Hicks, and now the third one that wants to be the Undersecretary for Policy. And they've all been, well, let me skip the third one. The first 2 have been pretty solid on their concerns about Iran, about going slow, about dealing with Iran, concerns about not just their nuclear ambitions, but just their ballistic ambitions. And these are things that have already, run out of time, if you will, that have sunset. So Iran's a major player, as we know. We have talked to the Central Com commander and wondering about how they're monitoring the movement of oil ships. Obviously, they're coming out of Iran. Even our allies in India have now prepared to maybe accept Iranian oil. So there's a lot to the Iranian situation that we need to keep our eyes on, because they're a problem in a very important neighborhood, as you know.
Well, yeah, you just mentioned the oil piece that we obviously need to figure out what we're going to do with putting their oil on the market. So thank you, sir. We appreciate that.
You bet. My pleasure. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you. We'll do more, and thank you for the time and the insight. Have a great rest of your day, okay?
Thanks. You too. Bye now.